Well, good evening, good morning, and good afternoon, whenever you're watching my video. Today uh, is something special. I typically don't get to share a lot of my professional work just because of rules. You got to follow the rules. Um, but this one is an exception because the owners and developers of this particular property have been very generous with their reins with regards to visual development on the characters. They have a podcast that really basically describes, and has the entire storyline already. So I'm sure they feel like it's okay to show the visual development because at the end of the day, it really helps the brand anyway. So today, I am developing a character for the Buddy Pegs property. Buddy Pegs being the company that I work for, that I did the children's book Taking a Lead for, and they're developing a new children's book, and the characters that go within that. Basically the same characters, but within the story context, the characters you see, or the character that you see today, is going to be kind of the superhero nature. You guys recognize this character from the previous previous character designs that I did. This is Schmitty. He's part of the Buddy Pegs world and their go-to guy as far as mechanics. He can fix anything. Um, and not to go too far into the story depth, but he's part of the dynamic duo um, that involves Watson and Wrigley. And we're going to get into Watson and Wrigley in a separate video, but today we're going to focus on this character. So what you see me doing right now is I'm roughing out the character silhouette and design that exists already. So Schmitty being a mechanic, I'm basically going to dress him in his standard day-to-day uniform, and it's been a while since I drew Schmitty, so I wanted to go ahead and get a feel for him again. And this is kind of par for the course whenever you're doing stuff like this, especially if you haven't especially if you haven't drawn a character in a while, is to go ahead and get re-familiarized with him. What you guys don't see off the page is a reference sheet that I did of all the different drawings that I did of Schmitty from the previous book. Shows him in different poses, different expressions, and whatnot. And basically what I'm doing is I'm just putting him in a generalized pose, three-quarter view, because what I'm going to do next here, you'll see in a few minutes, is I'm going to start kind of experimenting as far as putting his superhero costume on. What I like a lot about this process, and today I'm working in Photoshop. You guys can see the interface and the layers on the right hand side. I like to use a lot of layers, and I keep going back. You'll see I keep going back to the descriptive and stuff like that because I keep getting pinged. I've got this really great app. It's called Slack, and Slack is kind of like business text. You can get it on your phone or on your computer, and it keeps kind of a record of everything you do. And I'm basically business texting back and forth with Scott Fitzy, who is kind of directing me. I ask him different questions and whatnot, and he pings me immediately back, which is really nice. But yeah, so the character that Schmitty transforms into is Mouse Kabibble. I'm not going to really sit down and go through the character descriptives of him, but my first inclination, as you see here, was to place an entire mask over his head to really kind of give him that overall disguise, because the initial description of him was to have, he throws his cape up in the air, or not his cape, he throws his apron up in the air, and it lands, and it basically transforms him into Mouse Kabibble. And it's supposed to, based on the description, it forms over his head and goes over his shoulders, and makes him look like a mouse. So this was kind of the easiest, not easiest, this was kind of what I felt satisfied that particular descriptive initially. As you'll see here in a few minutes, as it gets to the next stage, things change a little bit. But basically, like I said, what you guys are seeing is that whole process. So I like to keep things in layers because I can go back and change things really quickly. I get a lot of questions in reference to what I like better, digital or traditional, because I do both. I do, standard pencil on paper. I do marker. I do color pencil, for character designs and whatnot. And then, of course, I use digital formats, which is what we're doing today. For my interface, I'm working on a 21UX Cintiq, which is a um, pressure-sensitive tablet. It's one of the older models. I think it's probably over 10 years old. And they, these things last forever, which is really nice because, if you were to go out and buy one, they're about $4,000. So, um, especially the new ones that are, the 27 incher is really expensive. But that being said, you amortize that cost over 10 years, and then, it doesn't look like that much of a cost. But anyway, so I switched programs, you guys saw, because I'm going to be coloring them in, and I wanted it to go relatively quickly. And even though Photoshop is really good at a lot of things, it kind of falls short in the specific areas that I need. So I went into a program called Clip Studio Paint, and I'm using the lasso tool to kind of fill in. Now you can do this in Photoshop too, but with Clip Studio Paint, it just seems to be a little bit quicker, and I like the interface a lot. And I use Clip Studio Paint a lot for character rough outs. And it's just really nice. And what's also nice about Clip Studio Paint is the fact that it's really inexpensive. During the sales and stuff, you can get the non-EX version for $25 to $50, and if you want to upgrade, it's inexpensive. And it comes with a myriad of brushes, and you can save as a Photoshop file. It's got all the layer transparency effects, and you can really modify the brushes to the way you want them. And it's got some great watercolor brushes. I mean, literally, if you're not using Clip Studio Paint as an illustrator, you're really missing out on a great tool. And I know some illustrators will be staunch and say Photoshop is the way to go, and I agree with you. Photoshop is a great way to go. But I've used Photoshop since 1996, so I know exactly what its capabilities are and its shortcomings, and I just like to experiment with different softwares. So anyway, not to get on a tangent here with Clip Studio Paint. So I'm blocking in, obviously, I'm blocking in the different sections of the character, and always, I'm zooming out and always paying attention. And if you see just a second ago, you saw the cape was draped over the tail, and this particular version that you're looking at right now, I kind of eliminated the tail, or it's tucked in behind, and I didn't really know if they wanted that, so I went back and forth with the developer, the guy who actually developed this particular character, who's part of the Buddy Pegs team, and he said, you need to show, you need to make sure and have Schmitty's whisker showing through, and even though he looks like a mouse, it's just a disguise. It's not an all-encompassing. It doesn't turn into a mouse. So that made a lot of sense to me. And then he said, basically that a lot of times other characters in the books or the storyline will ask him, "I've never seen a mouse with a tail like that." So that was something that I wasn't aware of, but he went ahead and pointed that out. So I went ahead and changed that. So now this mouse has a huge fluffy tail, because at the end of the day, he is a cat. And you want that to kind of be a tongue-in-cheek situation. You look at it and you're like, oh yeah, that's definitely Schmitty. But at the end of the day, he's got a disguise on. So yeah, I went traditionally to kind of determine as far as some of the little nuances and stuff for this character. And then I worked him into this particular drawing you're seeing right here. I like that rough feel and that really rough design feel of the different elements. You see the exposed stitching, you see maybe a tear, and you think, maybe that was kind of homemade. And if you know anything about this particular character, Schmitty, he is a cat that thinks he's a dog and he's dressed as a mouse. So that that in and of itself kind of makes me laugh. I always, whenever I do stuff for people, they always, obviously they want your opinion on stuff, and they want, to hear your input, because you have a creative voice, and as an artist, you always have your particular viewpoint, and that's a balance between your viewpoint and the person who's writing the checks to pay the bills and basically owns the property that you're working on. But you always want to push that boundary a little bit. Um, maybe this particular character was good at sewing. I don't know. I just wanted to throw that rough thing in there. And it worked. It worked in the context of this particular character design. So I'm just blocking in the color, local color that I'm coming back. If you look over on the right hand side, you see the little the layer palette on the right hand side. I've got a ton of layers and I'm working in Photoshop right now. And I'm using the pastel brush as part of a whole package of brushes that I have. I'm not going to go through the different brushes because you guys know that there's a billion brushes online for Photoshop. But yeah, I'm just working in the colors and I'm just feeling it out. It's really rough. I'm not looking to render it per se. I just want to block in the local color, maybe a little bit of tone in there, some highlights here and there, and just really feel it out. This is really what I enjoy the most. It does take time. I'm going to be honest with you. From the onset of the research to the development, to the assembling of the reference sheet, to then sitting down and drawing the different poses, coloring in the poses. I mean, you could blow through 5 to 7 to 10 hours on character designs with changes like it's nothing. I mean, that's why it's kind of difficult for me to price out sometimes, because somebody will ask me, what does it cost to do X amount of character designs, and it's a challenge, because if you have a lot of back and forth, and if you have a lot of directions that you go to, and different looks that you want to kind of experiment with to really flesh out that character, it's hard for me to sit down and put a really solid time frame on stuff, even though I work pretty quickly. If I wanted to sit down and experiment and do like 10 different capes, I'd like to do that, but at the end of the day, you kind of have to balance it and say, hey, think ahead of time and say, maybe as cape, just stick to the description and go from there, and not go too far off on tangents, even though, as artists, we all know the happy accident happens and everything is good. So, okay, so I moved on to the action pose because I wanted to do an action pose. I was really feeling, I don't want to say bored, but, that particular pose that I was working on, again, it was just supposed to show the generalized character design, and now I wanted to get into a pose to where the character kind of stepped into that action moment or that pose. So went ahead and did just a real rough construction sketch. You see I'm working through it right now of Schmitty / Mouse Kabibble. And I did a really rough, and now what I'm going to do is I did another layer on top of it. Those of you who are not really experienced with Photoshop, Photoshop works in layers. Think of pieces of paper stacked on top of each other, and each one you can adjust whether or not you can see through that particular piece of paper, and you can do different layer effects on it, layer transparencies that from overlay to multiply, and those are the things that you would learn after years and years of using Photoshop. So yeah, I'm basically going over my initial sketch. I'm pushing a little bit I'm not tracing over what I did. I'm pushing it, I'm giving it some detail, I'm pulling back on some stuff, I'm experimenting a little bit here and there. And as an illustrator and artist, you have to kind of do that whenever you're doing character designs. So yeah, I'll rough in his basic shape and form and silhouette, and then I'll come back here in a second and I'll put his mask on him. I really enjoyed doing this particular character. I also have some other videos that I'll be posting of the other two characters here soon, but this one I really enjoyed. He was just a lot of fun. Schmitty to me is somebody that I can really identify with, basically because I'm kind of a not a wild child, but I really enjoy the action. I enjoy action movies and stuff like that, and I fix a lot of stuff, and I just really enjoy his particular character. It's just a lot of fun. So yeah, again, I'm keeping it really rough. I'm not trying to get into too much detail, and now I'm going to be putting his mask on him. So I referenced his mask right there to the left to make sure that I get all the proportions right and the placement of the nose and what exactly it looks like and how it looks like on his head. So that's what I'm basically doing. I kind of experimented there, as you saw, with something going up the top of his head. It just didn't feel right. Whenever you start working on things like this, you'll experiment. You'll be like, oh gosh, that doesn't really feel right. And that's part of that push and pull process that you really go through whenever you design a character. And now I'm just, finalizing exactly what I, was talking about before. So I erase things out, and you can see what's kind of funny is you can see he's a cat. I mean, there's no, there's no question whether or not it's Schmitty or not, and I think that's hilarious. And that's kind of the fun of exactly what this whole book and storyline is about. Kids can look at that and really identify with that. And two, what's nice is, these characters, even though this particular one has a little bit of edge, but it's not, unruly edge. I know that some of the characters out there, especially in the superhero world, they're like Batman. I mean, of course, Batman isn't supposed to be for kids, but we wanted this whole storyline to be friendly, kid friendly. And really tie back into that whole traditional, early radio drama and the radio serials and stuff like that. And we just wanted it to be fun. There's so much yuckiness out there these days that it's nice to have a story that is just basically fun. And that's exactly what this is. I encourage you, if you haven't already, to check out their first book, B is for Bicycles, and it really introduces the two characters, Watson and Wrigley. And the second book, which is coming out really soon, for those who ordered it on the Kickstarter, it's actually at the publisher right now, so it'll be coming to you really soon. And then, of course, after it comes, it'll be available on Amazon, and I'll do a video in reference to that here soon. And it really introduces the characters in the entire Buddy Pegs world of Spokesville. And it's just fun, and that's what I do. I've always wanted to do characters like this, because a lot of the characters that I do previous have a lot of edge to them, for video games and stuff like that. But this one is just plain old fun. Yeah. So yeah, I'm blocking in the color and wrapping things up. Just a couple more minutes here, and you won't have to listen to me drone on anymore. But yeah, it's funny, this particular character, his cape is covered in sequins. He's got a green cape covered in sequins, which is hilarious. And, again, being a cat that thinks he's a dog that acts like a mouse superhero, I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. So, and you don't want to overcomplicate characters either. I see a lot of times, people trying to put too much into the character, and it confuses the viewer too much. So you always want to keep a solid handle on exactly what makes sense and what doesn't make sense in the context of what the character is and who he is and what he can do. So anyway, wrapping up, I'm going to put a couple shadows here just to give it a little bit of form. And I think that's probably going to wrap it up for today. Thank you guys for visiting the channel. And if you like what you see, please hit that like button, subscribe if it's your first time. And we got a lot more coming, a lot going on. And browse around, look at some of the other videos. I got over 100 videos. Enjoy.